global warming, basically there is quite a bit of skepticism about whether global warming is man-made. I don't think anyone doubts that climate change happens, but there is quite a debate about that. Of course, in the mainstream, there isn't really too much debate. You get the odd scientist on programs giving the other side, but anyway, that's for another blog or another podcast. And the same thing with the global financial crisis. From talking to people about it, people seem to think that it was just people using their credit cards too much, whereas it's far more detailed than that. The reality is that the aforementioned, quote, good cynic uses a negative attitude as a means, a searchlight, not a lazy end, to cut through the crap and seek the truth. And they actually live a lighter life in the sense of a committed non-participation in things which analysis tells you are absurd or even immoral. The utter folly of consumerism, coupled with the known cynical and merciless treatment of humans and animals to produce certain items, makes such non-participation an act of integrity. And it's nicer to have less pressure on yourself to follow all the things we are supposed to follow. The Olympic Games and sport in general undoubtedly reveal a dark side when analysed. The good cynic has probably taken more time than the optimist to think of how cruel it is for the poor of a city to see the apparently precious coffers being spent relentlessly on what is, deep down, an unimportant spectacle outside the world of PR, which the public at large don't question thanks to the sacred, quote, feel-good factor these events create. Another long sentence there. On the subject of the feel-good factor, society and the mainstream media seem to have a label, a tag or an angle that can be placed on a person who questions and which people tend to follow. So a questioner of the whole idea of the Olympics is a, quote, killjoy. If you happen to be in your 30s or older, you are, quote, getting old or, quote, growing cynical. If you're very fortunate, you might even be called a, quote, nihilist. Definition of nihilism include, quote, an extreme form of skepticism that denies all existence, quote, a belief that all values are baseless and that nothing can be known or communicated, and, quote, a belief that traditional morals, ideas, beliefs, etc. have no worth or value. Now note the subtle difference between the first two definitions and the third, which focuses on traditional values rather than all values. Substitute traditional for mainstream conservative and change have no worth or value for should always be questioned and never be blindly believed to be true, and you have a healthy skeptic. Perhaps I should repeat that because as I'm reading that sounds a bit difficult to understand. The third definition of nihilism, is a belief that traditional morals, ideas, beliefs, etc. have no worth or value. Now, if you tweak that slightly to say that a belief that mainstream conservative morals, ideas, beliefs, and etc. should always be questioned and never be blindly believed to be true, then you have a healthy skeptic. So the link between a nihilist and a healthy skeptic, it's a bit closer than it seems if you just tweak the definition slightly. Right, as far as things not having any meaning, there are a couple of things to say here. Anyone reading this can do the 10-minute test, which takes a lot less than 10 minutes to actually do. Do it right now, this minute, here we go. Ask yourself, if you suddenly found out you had 10 minutes to live, how many of the things that are bothering you and holding you back now would mean anything at all? In particular, how many of the small gripes that are irking you about those close to you or in your acquaintance, and the small or large grudges that you are holding against people or the world in general, would retain their significance at the very end of your life? I fully understand that serious illness, extreme suffering and premature death are exceptions to this rule, but mercifully few of us have to encounter these with any kind of regularity. For the majority, life seems to be mundane and rather humdrum, giving us time to stress ourselves out about all manner of things that our creative minds care to invent or give significance to. These kind of thoughts have no real meaning. So the point I'm really trying to make is that, again, it's if you say something doesn't have meaning, meaningless, it seems to be negative. But if you say that something very trivial is meaningless, to me that seems to be a good thing. Without causing offence to any fans of Lady Gaga, let's take her as an example, Justin Bieber, I think their role as spokesman for society, let's say, to me is fairly meaningless. I think their music is fairly meaningless. I don't mean to be judgmental about that, but I think you can make a clear distinction between music that has lasting value. I'll name check Bob Dylan, that's a personal thing, or John Lennon is another one. The point I'm trying to make is that there's nothing wrong with saying that certain things have no meaning. It doesn't have to be negative. Anyway, in addition, we live on a planet with a surface area of 510 billion... yes, 510 billion 72,000. That's not right. 510 million 72,000 square kilometers, which is home to nearly 7 billion people and anything between 10 and 30 million different species of animals. It may seem like a small world if you travel to Australia and happen to encounter the person who was your best friend at school back in England, but would you want to clean it? That's a phrase. It's a small world, but I wouldn't want to clean it. This is, of course, the tip of the iceberg. When you look at space, the numbers and proportions become staggering. I've put here, rather than give you all the numbers, I'll let the following 1.5-minute video illustrate the point very succinctly, so you'll have to go to my blog. It's basically a video which is comparing the size of all the planets. So it starts with, I think of the 8 planets, there's now 8 planets on there. Earth is the 4th biggest. I'm not going to commit to that. But first of all, there are planets which are a lot bigger than the Earth. Obviously the Sun is massively bigger than the Earth. But then the video takes you through lots of other planets which are far vaster than the Sun, and it really is absolutely mind-boggling to see how small the Earth is. To say something is, quote, insignificant, worthless or meaningless is purely contextual as to whether it's good or bad, and bear in mind that this kind of language manipulation is willingly or otherwise used to persuade and to invade our free will on a daily basis. As life gets harder, faster and statistically worse for our mental health and happiness, which is in itself a strange development as we, quote, evolve and grow as a species and presumably as a society, the need for optimism and happiness seems to grow also. The daily grind of quiet misery means that we need smiles and positivity, even if it's just positive language without substance. So yeah, I mean, if you go back to the Olympics, it's a feel-good event, you know, and I don't consider myself a killjoy. It's just I've looked a bit further into it, and there's a dark side. There's a dark side to sport. I mean, you may have heard about the recent NLF scandals. Read about gymnasts and the way they're treated, or the way that East German athletes were treated in the 80s. And, you know, there's a dark side to that. But nowadays, you know, as the world gets harder, as I've said, we need something positive to hang on to. There's a great Pink Floyd lyric from the song Time, and it's hanging on in quiet desperation is the English way. Well, I wouldn't say it's the only the English way, but perhaps it's there is something in that regarding England. Right, but the good cynic, skeptic, non-believer, non-participant, etc. is perhaps more valuable and vital than ever if he can prove that he's done his research and arrived at what appears a pessimistic conclusion through a positive quest for the truth, not a bitter need to spread his own negative psychology onto others. Now, if you do any research into childhood and the effects of childhood deprivation or childhood trauma, you can find that, you know, a lot of the time when people are being negative, it's their own issues that they're projecting onto others. But also, the point I'm making, it seems a pessimistic conclusion, but a positive quest for the truth. Now, I think personally that the quest for the truth is positive. Going down the rabbit hole is a positive thing. It's sometimes painful. It can brings you to question all kinds of things that you hadn't before. And in conclusion, spread love and happiness to your fellow man, but also ... question everything.